My mom laughed and said it's not like you're doing anything important after volunteering me as my sister's full-time unpaid babysitter, so I stopped showing up and their entire family system collapsed. I'm 31, and until recently I honestly believed I was doing what a good son does, showing up, helping out, keeping the peace. That belief lasted right up until the day my mom decided, without asking me, that I was now the permanent solution to my sister's childcare problems. Not helping, not filling in, permanent. And she said it with this smile that told me she'd already made up her mind. It started small, which is probably why I didn't push back hard enough at first. A Tuesday afternoon call from my mom while I was in the middle of answering emails for my remote job. She didn't even ask how I was. She just said, "Your sister's overwhelmed. I told her you'd take the kids after school this week." I remember pausing, staring at my laptop, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Some explanation, some discussion, something that implied I had a choice. Nothing came. When I said I had work, she laughed. Actually laughed and said, "You're at home anyway. It's not like you're doing anything important." That should have been the first red flag, but I swallowed it. I always do. I've always been the flexible one in the family, the one without real commitments in their eyes. I don't have kids, I'm not married, I don't own a house yet. So somehow that translated over the years into me being endlessly available. I told myself it was just for a few days. Temporary. That was the word my mom kept using like a soothing lullaby. Just temporary. "George, your sister just needs help getting back on her feet." My sister Lena is 2 years older than me and has 3 kids under 10. She also has a long history of things just happening to her. Jobs fall through, babysitters quit, plans change last minute. Somehow all of it always lands at someone else's feet. And more often than not, that someone is me. When I showed up that first afternoon, her kids ran past me like a small herd. Shoes half on backpacks, open crumbs already falling onto the floor. Lena barely looked up from her phone. She said, "They've already eaten. Homework's in their bags. Bedtime's at 9 o'clock. Like she was handing me a checklist I'd asked for. I stayed until 9:30 that night, then 10 the next. Then suddenly I was picking them up every weekday. Then weekends started creeping in, framed as emergencies just for a few hours, just this once. I rearranged my work schedule, skipped social plans, started waking up earlier to make up for lost time. Every time I hinted that this was becoming a lot, my mom stepped in, fast, cutting me off before I could finish a sentence. "Families help each other," she'd say. Sharp and final. "And you don't have real responsibilities yet, so this is how you contribute." That line hit harder than I expected. I remember standing in my mom's kitchen when she said it. The kids arguing loudly in the living room, the smell of reheated food hanging in the air. "You don't have real responsibilities." She said it like it was a fact, not an opinion. Like my job, my time, my life existed in some lower category that could be rearranged whenever it was convenient. I tried to explain that working from home didn't mean I was free all day. She waved her hand at me. "You sit at a computer. Your sister is raising children. That's real life." From that point on, the tone shifted. It wasn't gratitude anymore, it was expectation. If I showed up 5 minutes late, Lena would sigh loudly and say she was already late for something. If I said I couldn't stay past a certain time, my mom would step in later with a disappointed call about how stressed Lena was and how I'd let everyone down. No one asked if I was tired. No one asked how my work was going. It was like I'd been quietly reassigned a role, and everyone else had agreed without me. What really got to me wasn't even the babysitting itself. It was the way it erased me. Conversations stopped including me unless they were about logistics. Family dinners turned into planning meetings about who needed help next week. If I mentioned anything about my own plans, the room would go quiet for a second before my mom redirected the conversation back to the kids. I started feeling like a background character in my own family. Useful, but interchangeable. The first time I said no outright. It was a Sunday evening. Lena texted asking if I could take the kids the next morning because her regular sitter fell through. I stared at my phone for a long time before typing back that I couldn't. I had an important meeting. I hit send and immediately felt that familiar twist of guilt, like I'd just done something wrong. The response came 10 minutes later, not from Lena, but from my mom. "I don't understand why you're being difficult. This is just temporary. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That was when something in me shifted. Not snapped, shifted quietly. I realized temporary had no end date. I realized my boundaries were invisible to them because they'd never needed to see them before. I started paying attention after that. The way plans were made without me. The way my time was spoken about like a shared resource. The way my mom would praise Lena for holding it together while ignoring the fact that I was the one making that possible. So I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I stopped trying to be understood. I just stopped showing up. No announcement, no confrontation. On Monday, I didn't go. I stayed home and worked. On Tuesday, I didn't answer my phone. On Wednesday, I went out for a long walk during the hours I'd usually be watching the kids. Each day, I waited for someone to ask me what was going on. No one did at first. Then the messages started coming in. Confused at first, then irritated, then anxious. Lena's texts got shorter. My mom's calls got more frequent. By Friday, my phone was lighting up nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails. Group messages where my name was mentioned over and over, like I'd vanished into thin air. I listened to one voicemail from my mom late that night. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way it gets when she's trying not to sound upset. She said, "We need to talk. This isn't okay. Your sister is in a bind and we don't understand why you're doing this." I sat there in the dark, phone in my hand, heart beating faster than it had all week. For the first time, it wasn't me panicking. It was them. And as I stared at the screen, watching another call come in that I didn't answer, I realized this wasn't just about babysitting anymore. Something bigger was about to surface. Something that had been sitting under all of this for years, waiting for the moment when I finally stopped being convenient. By the following Monday, the silence had turned into something sharper. Not quiet anymore, pressurized, the kind that feels like it's waiting to burst. I hadn't blocked anyone. I wanted to see what they'd say when they realized I wasn't going to fold immediately. That was probably my mistake because it gave them room to escalate. It started with my mom showing up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the knock through my headphones while I was on a call. That heavy, insistent rhythm she uses when she's already decided she's in the right. I muted myself, waited hoping she'd leave. She didn't. When I finally opened the door, she walked past me like she owned the place, purse still on her shoulder, eyes already scanning the room. "So this is what you've been doing," she said, gesturing vaguely at my desk, "ignoring your family." I told her calmly that I told Lena couldn't babysit anymore, that I had work, that I needed boundaries. She didn't sit down, she didn't ask questions, she just crossed her arms inside like I was a teenager who hadn't cleaned his room. "You didn't tell us you were done," she said. "You just disappeared." "Do you know what position you put your sister in?" I said. "The same position I've been in for months." That's when her face changed. Not angry, dismissive. "This again," she said. "George, you're making this into something it's not. Lena has 3 children. You have a laptop." I felt something tighten in my chest. I tried again, slower this time. I explained the missed meetings, the stress, the way I felt like my life had been put on hold without my consent. She waved me off halfway through. "Everyone makes sacrifices," she said. "But you're the only one making this dramatic." Before I could respond, her phone rang. "Lena," she answered immediately, put her on speaker without asking me. Lena's voice came through strained and irritated. "Mom, where are you?" "I had to leave work early again. My boss is not happy. George was supposed to be there." I said, "I never said I'd be there." Lena scoffed. "You always are. You know how this works." That sentence landed harder than any insult. "You know how this works," like it was a system, like my role had been decided years ago. I looked at my mom, waiting, hoping for her to correct that assumption. She didn't. She just nodded slightly, like Lena couldn't see her, but I could. "This isn't working," my mom said. "Finally, we need a solution." I said, "The solution is you hire a babysitter. Or Lena adjusts her schedule. I'm not available anymore." There was a pause. Then my mom said something that made my stomach drop. "Then we'll have to rethink some things." I asked her what she meant. She didn't answer right away. She just pursed her lips like she was choosing her words carefully. "Your father and I have been helping you out," she said. "More than you realize." That was new. Helping me how I asked. She glanced around my apartment again. "Your rent," she said. "The reason it's so reasonable is because your aunt owns the building. We talked her into keeping it low. As a favor, family favors go both ways." I stared at her. I'd lived there for 3 years. No one had ever mentioned this. Not once. "You never told me that." I said. "We didn't think we needed to," she replied. "Because you were being helpful until now." The call with Lena was still connected. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "So what Lena said, he just gets to walk away and we're supposed to scramble." My mom said no, he just needs a reminder of how things actually work. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about babysitting. It never was. It was about leverage. I asked my mom directly, "Are you threatening me?" She looked genuinely offended. "Don't be so dramatic," she said. I'm saying that if you stop acting like part of this family, you can't expect family support. I felt embarrassed, then angry, then something colder underneath. So all of this, I said slowly, was conditional. She shrugged. Everything is conditional. After she left, I sat on my couch for a long time replaying the conversation. The realization settled in slowly and painfully. They didn't see my help as generosity. They saw it as obligation, something owed. And now that I was trying to step out of line, they were reminding me who held the power. The next few days were relentless. Lena started posting vague things online about fake support systems and people who disappear when you need them most. Family group chats lit up with passive-aggressive messages about pulling together and showing up. My dad, who had stayed silent until then, finally called me. His voice was tired but firm. "You need to fix this," he said. "Your mother is very upset." I asked him if he thought what they were doing was fair. He didn't answer that. He just said Lena's kids are suffering. That was always the shield, the kids. As if I was hurting them personally by reclaiming my time. I started doubting myself again just for a moment. Then something happened that erased that doubt completely. On Friday afternoon, I got an email from my landlord. It was polite but formal. It said that due to changing circumstances, my lease would not be renewed at the end of the term's 60 days notice. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. Then I noticed the CC line. My mom. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. I asked her why she was copied on an email about my housing. There was a pause. Then she said calmly, "We needed to protect Lena. You left us no choice." That was it. That was the moment. The ground shifted under everything I thought I knew about my family. They hadn't just guilt me. They hadn't just dismissed me. They had gone behind my back and pulled a lever they knew would hurt me. All because I stopped being useful. I hung up without another word. I sat there staring at the email, my heart racing, a strange mix of betrayal and clarity washing over me. This wasn't an argument anymore. This was a line crossed. And as I sat in that quiet apartment surrounded by boxes I hadn't packed yet, one thought kept repeating in my head, steady and unmistakable. The first thing I felt after the anger faded wasn't resolve or determination. It was exhaustion. The kind that sinks into your bones and makes even simple decisions feel heavy. I wish I could say I immediately sprang into action, that I saw the betrayal clearly and turned it into fuel right away. I didn't. I shut down for a while. I kept going through the motions at work, answering emails, sitting in meetings, but everything felt slightly out of focus, like I was watching my own life from a few feet away. The apartment didn't feel like mine anymore after that email. Every wall felt temporary. Every sound from the hallway made my stomach tighten, like someone was about to knock again and tell me time was up. 60 days sounds like a lot until you realize how quickly they disappear when you're mentally paralyzed. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not friends, not coworkers. There was a part of me that still felt embarrassed. Like I'd failed some unspoken test of adulthood by letting my parents have that much control over my life. The family messages didn't stop. If anything, they shifted tone. Now there was concern layered over the pressure. My mom left voicemails saying things like, "We're worried about you, and you don't seem like yourself lately." Lena sent a message that said, "I hope you're happy. The kids keep asking where you went." That one hurt more than I expected. Not because it was fair, but because it was effective. It painted me as the villain without acknowledging anything that led up to it. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't either reopen the wound or make me sound defensive. Instead, I focused on getting through each day. Some mornings I woke up with that familiar tightness in my chest, the feeling that something bad was about to happen, even though nothing was actively happening at all. Other mornings I felt strangely numb, like my body had decided to conserve energy by shutting down unnecessary emotions. The lowest point came about 2 weeks after the lease notice. I was sitting at my kitchen table late at night, surrounded by open tabs on my laptop, apartment listings, budget spreadsheets, emails I hadn't answered. I realized I was doing the math over and over, hoping the numbers would change if I stared long enough. They didn't. Rent everywhere else was higher. Moving would cost money I hadn't planned to spend. And underneath all of it was the quiet realization that if I hadn't stopped babysitting, none of this would be happening. That thought scared me, not because it made me want to go back, but because it showed me how deep their leverage had gone. They'd built a system where my comfort depended on my compliance, and I hadn't even noticed. Sitting there in that silence, I finally let myself feel the grief of it. Not just the housing situation, but the loss of the family I thought I had. The idea that support was mutual. The belief that my worth wasn't tied to what I could provide. I didn't cry dramatically. It was quieter than that. Just a few minutes of staring at the wall, breathing slowly, letting the truth settle. When I stood up from the table, something had shifted again. Not in a triumphant way, in a practical one. The next morning, I told my manager what was going on. Not the family drama in detail, just that I was dealing with a housing issue and might need some flexibility. To my surprise, he was immediately supportive. He asked if I wanted to temporarily adjust my hours. He reminded me that my work had been solid and that this didn't change that. It was such a small interaction, but it felt like oxygen. Proof that not every authority figure used care as a bargaining chip. I started telling a few friends too carefully at first, like I was testing the water. Every single one reacted the same way. Disbelief followed by anger on my behalf. One of them helped me tour apartments. Another offered to store some boxes if I needed it. No conditions, no guilt, just help. It was jarring to realize how different support could feel when it wasn't wrapped in expectation. I threw myself into work more intentionally after that. Not as an escape, but as a way to anchor myself. I took on a project I'd been putting off. I volunteered for a task that would normally have gone to someone else. Not because I had to prove anything, but because it felt good to choose where my energy went. Slowly, my confidence started to rebuild. Not in a loud way, but in the quiet reassurance that I was capable of handling things on my own. Meanwhile, my family's behavior grew more erratic. My mom oscillated between icy silence and sudden warmth. One day, she'd text, "We miss you dinner this week." The next, she'd send something clipped and formal about next steps if I didn't reconsider helping Lena. My dad tried a different angle. He called and talked about unrelated things like the weather or a neighbor's new car, as if pretending nothing was wrong would somehow reset everything. I listened politely, but didn't engage. Every time the conversation drifted toward Lena or the kids, I steered it back or ended the call. The thing that surprised me most during that period was how much lighter my days felt without the babysitting. Even with all the stress layered on top, I had evenings again, quiet ones. I cooked meals without rushing. I read before bed. I took walks just to clear my head. The guilt would creep in sometimes, usually late at night, but it didn't stay as long as it used to. I started to see it for what it was, conditioning. About a month in, I found a smaller apartment across town. It wasn't perfect. Older building, less space, but it was mine. Fully mine with no invisible strings attached. When I signed the lease, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, relief. Like I was finally standing on solid ground, even if it wasn't as polished as before. I didn't tell my family right away. Part of me wanted to keep that wind to myself. When my mom eventually found out through my aunt, she called immediately. "Why didn't you tell us?" She asked, her voice tight again. I said, "Because I didn't need permission this time." There was a long pause after that. She didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She just said, "This isn't how families work," and hung up. I started to understand then that my growth wasn't just inconvenient to them. It was threatening. The more stable I became on my own, the less leverage they had. The more confident I felt, the harder it would be to pull me back into the role they designed for me. And Lena noticed it too. Her messages changed. Less accusatory, more probing. She asked where I'd moved, if I was doing okay financially. Once she even said, "Mom's really stressed. You know how she gets." I read that message several times before putting my phone down. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. By the end of that month, I wasn't healed. I wasn't past it. But I was different. Stronger in a way that didn't require approval. Clearer about what I would and wouldn't accept. I'd lost my old apartment, but I'd gained something more valuable. Perspective. What I didn't know yet was that my family wasn't done reacting to that change. They were just regrouping. And the moment they realized I wasn't coming back quietly, they started making plans of their own. I didn't wake up one morning thinking I'm going to get revenge. It was quieter than that, more deliberate. The urge didn't come from anger anymore. It came from clarity. Once the emotional fog lifted, I started seeing patterns I'd ignored for years. And when you see patterns clearly, you also start seeing pressure points. The first thing I did was nothing on purpose. I stayed polite but distant. I responded to messages hours later instead of immediately. I declined invitations without explaining myself. I stopped volunteering information. That alone seemed to unsettle them more than any argument ever had. My mom especially didn't know how to react to common difference. She kept trying different tones, like cycling through tools in a drawer, hoping one would still work. One week she tried nostalgia. She sent photos from when we were kids captioned with things like, "Remember when you used to love coming over." Another week she tried concern. "You seem withdrawn. I hope you're taking care of yourself." And then when neither worked, she went back to control. Subtle at first, then less so. That was when I started paying closer attention. I realized something important during one of those half-awkward phone calls with my dad. He mentioned offhandedly that Lena was having trouble keeping her job. Again, that her boss had warned her about attendance issues. He said it like it was unfortunate, but unavoidable like weather. I asked a few neutral questions, nothing suspicious. How long had this been going on? What kind of schedule did she have now? He answered without thinking too much about it. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall connecting dots. The babysitting wasn't just convenient for them, it was essential. They'd built their entire routine around my availability. Without me, things didn't just get harder, they started falling apart. I didn't feel smug about that. I felt cautious because if there's one thing I knew about my family, it was that they didn't handle loss of control gracefully. They would escalate again. The only question was how. So I started documenting things. Not dramatically, just quietly. Screenshots of texts where expectations were stated as facts. Voicemails where guilt was layered on thick. The email with my mom, CC on my lease termination. Dates times patterns. I didn't even know exactly what I'd need it for yet. I just knew I didn't want to be caught unprepared again. At the same time, I strengthened the parts of my life that had nothing to do with them. I leaned further into work not by burning myself out, but by being strategic. I had a conversation with my manager about growth opportunities. He mentioned a leadership track that required a bit more responsibility, but came with flexibility and better pay. I said I was interested. I meant it. I also talked to my aunt, the one who owned my old building, not to confront her, just to understand. We met for coffee. She looked uncomfortable the entire time, stirring her drink too much, avoiding eye contact. When I asked her directly if my parents had asked her to not renew my lease, she hesitated, then nodded. They said it was for the family. She said quietly that you were being difficult and this might help reset things. I thanked her for being honest. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. But as I walked home afterward, something crystallized in my mind. They hadn't just crossed a line emotionally. They'd involved other people. They'd used reputation and pressure to box me in. That changed the scale of things. Around this time, Lena started reaching out more directly, not about babysitting, at least not explicitly. She'd asked how I was adjusting, if the new place was okay, if work was still flexible. The questions were careful, like she was feeling out how much ground she'd lost. I answered politely but vaguely. Yes, the place was fine. Work was going well. Busy. One evening she called instead of texting. That alone was unusual. She sounded tired, not angry, just worn down. She told me she was overwhelmed. That mom was constantly on her case now that things had been easier when I was around. There it was. Not an apology, not accountability, just nostalgia for the convenience I provided. I don't know how you do it, she said. Just living your life without all this chaos? I almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead, I said something non-committal and let the silence stretch. She filled it, of course. She always did. She talked about the kids, about money, about how mom had offered to help more but was stressed. Every sentence was a hook cast in my direction. After the call, I didn't feel tempted. I felt informed. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. My mom invited me to a family dinner, framed as a peace offering. No pressure, she said. We just want to reconnect. I hesitated, then agreed. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted to observe them in their natural environment, now that I wasn't playing my old role. The dinner was tense, but civil, too civil. Everyone was on their best behavior. Compliments felt rehearsed, questions felt loaded. My mom kept watching me like she was waiting for me to slip and reassure her everything was back to normal. I didn't. Halfway through the meal, Lena mentioned casually that she might need help again in the future. Not now, just eventually. My mom jumped in immediately, saying, "Families adapt. We'll figure something out." I nodded, said nothing, and kept eating. The silence that followed was thick. They weren't used to it not being filled with my compliance. After dinner, as I was leaving, my mom pulled me aside. She lowered her voice and said, "You know, if you ever want things to go back to how they were, we can talk." I looked at her and realized something important. She thought this was a standoff, that eventually I'd get tired of holding my ground and come back to the table on her terms. She didn't understand that I wasn't trying to go back at all. That night, I made a decision not to lash out, not to confront them publicly, but to let the consequences of their own choices unfold without interference. I stopped shielding Lena from the fallout of her schedule. I stopped smoothing things over with extended family. When people asked why I wasn't around as much, I told the truth calmly and briefly. No embellishment, no drama, just facts. The story changed depending on who heard it, but the core stayed the same. I was setting boundaries, I'd been punished for it. I was moving on, and people listened. I noticed subtle shifts, fewer assumptions, more questions directed at my parents instead of me. My mom hated that. She started calling more frequently again, trying to get ahead of narratives. I let them go to voicemail. By then, I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. I knew something was coming. Pressure like that doesn't just disappear. It looks for a new outlet. And when it finds one, it tends to expose everything that was hidden underneath. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived with a phone call on a Wednesday afternoon while I was in the middle of work. I almost didn't answer it. The number was Lena's. And by then, I'd learned that nothing good followed those calls. But something told me to pick up. She didn't start with small talk. She sounded panicked. Not frustrated, not annoyed, panicked. She told me she'd been fired that morning. Attendance issues. Final warning ignored. No more chances. She said mom was at her house crying. That dad was trying to figure something out. And then she said the sentence that finally confirmed everything I'd suspected. They're saying, this is your fault. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch. Lena filled it like she always did, explaining how, if I just helped a little longer, how if I hadn't made things difficult, none of this would have happened. She said mom had told her I was being selfish, that I'd abandoned the family when they needed me most. When she finally stopped talking, I said calmly, you lost your job because you missed work. I didn't fire you. She got quiet, then defensive, then angry. And then, almost without realizing it, she said something she hadn't meant to say out loud. Mom said, if you just cooperate again, she could fix things. She said she'd help you with rent next time, or whatever. That was it. The confirmation I needed. Even now, after everything, they still thought leverage was the answer, that my independence was temporary, that if they applied enough pressure, I'd step back into place. I thanked Lena for telling me and ended the call. That evening, I made 3 phone calls of my own. The first was to my manager. I accepted the leadership role he'd mentioned weeks earlier. The raise went into effect immediately. The second was to my aunt. I told her I wasn't angry with her, but I made it clear I wouldn't be participating in any more family interventions. I told her the truth of what had happened. She was quiet for a long time. Then she apologized, not defensively, genuinely. The third call was the hardest. It was to my parents. I asked them to meet me in public neutral ground, a cafe near my new place. They arrived together tense but confident, like they still believed this conversation would end in me folding. My mom started first, saying she was worried about Lena, about the kids, about how everything had spiraled since I stepped back. I let her finish. Then I took out my phone. I told them I knew about the lease, about the conversations behind my back, about the idea that help in our family came with strings attached. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid out the facts one by one, like items on a table. My mom tried to interrupt. I held up my hand and kept going. I told them I was done being managed, done being volunteered, done being punished for setting boundaries. I told them I had documentation of everything, not because I wanted to use it, but because I wanted them to understand I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't misremembering. I saw the system clearly now. My dad looked down at the table. My mom went very still. Then I said the sentence that shifted the power permanently. I will not be helping Lena, not now, not later. And if you try to pressure me again, I will stop engaging entirely. My mom laughed short and sharp. You can't just walk away from your family. I said I already did. You just didn't notice until it affected you. There was nothing dramatic after that. No yelling, no tears, just the slow realization settling over them that the old levers no longer worked, that the threats were empty, that the consequences were theirs now. The fallout came fast. Without me as a buffer, my parents had to step in fully. Childcare costs piled up. My mom started canceling her own plans. My dad took time off work. The extended family, now aware of what had actually happened, stopped offering sympathy and started asking uncomfortable questions. Why hadn't Lena arranged proper childcare? Why had I been expected to handle it for free? Why had housing been used as punishment? The narrative flipped quietly but decisively. A few weeks later, my mom called again. Her voice was tired. Not controlling, just tired. She said, "We didn't think you'd actually leave. I said, "That's the problem." Lena never apologized. Not directly. She sent a message months later saying she hoped we could move past things. I didn't respond. Some doors don't need to be slammed to stay closed. My life stabilized in ways I hadn't expected. Work flourished. I slept better. I made plans without checking anyone else's schedule first. The guilt faded, replaced by something steadier: self-respect. I still think about the kids sometimes. I hope they're okay, but I no longer confuse responsibility with sacrifice, and I no longer believe love should cost me my autonomy. The last time my mom brought up family duty, I told her the truth. I didn't stop showing up because I don't care. I stopped because I finally do. And for the first time, I meant it.